I can do things at WED without asking anybody, even my wife.
Coney Island, world's biggest barrel of
And
fun.
anywhere else your imagination takes you.
Okay, we've done that. Now what?
To get the whole show now, you hurry.
Anything's possible in Disneyland.
Welcome aboard the Themed Attraction Podcast, where we take you for a ride through the fascinating world of theme park design. That is, you've just set sail on a voyage of discovery and discussion with theme park industry masters of the craft. I'm your skipper, Freddy Martin, and roaming the river with me, as always, is theme park designer, master planner, and creative officer of Storyland Studios, Mel McGowan. Where's the river guiding us today, Mel?
Well, Freddy, today's excursion is taking us deep into the jungle, into the weeds of disciplines that get me really excited because it's what we live to do here, the worlds of architecture and show set design. Our guest today is Kevin Sherbrooke. He's an AIA licensed architect and show set designer who understands the intersection of creative, blue sky, and the limiting structure of architectural design. And I can't believe it's taken us this long to actually hit on architecture.
Right.
We've got about a dozen nationally licensed architects in-house here, and they've been waiting in the wings to hear us talk about their favorite subject. Kevin's background gives him a unique perspective on the ups and downs and ins and outs of an industry on the move. He's been involved with the creation of attractions and environments at parks like Epcot, Animal Kingdom, and Universal's Islands of Adventure. He's also worked on projects with some of the industry's current heads of states, like Scott Trowbridge and Mark Woodbury.
Well, we're really glad to get some time with Kevin between projects to talk through his experience and share that insight with you, our listeners. All right, folks, keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the boat because this episode is about to leave the dock. Hit it, Sam. Well, Mel, we've been doing this podcast for a little over a year. I think this episode's going to drop after just about a year after we got this whole thing started. And it was a pretty fun idea to get it started with. I think you brought it up, said, hey, I'd just love to do a podcast. We started talking through the ideas of what it would be. And we had big plans, big ideas for this. You know, you first start talking about a podcast, you're like, we'll do it once a week. We'll be together. We can have all these guests. We listed all the different people that we know in the industry. You brought out your little black book to talk through the people that you've worked with. And we're like, wow, this will be really great. But then the reality set in and we realized we were going to have to find spots on our schedule to get together in remote places around the country even. And we've done these.
You mean day jobs?
Yeah, we've got our day jobs to fit
in too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the reality sets in. So, ideas are great, but then you got to make them a reality.
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways, I'm actually getting ready to speak at a conference called the Ideation Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one thing to have a bunch of ideas, to wake up in the morning with that great idea. It's a completely different thing to execute and implement and to engineer that imagination. And again, I think this podcast is a great example of, if something's a passion of yours, it's one thing to call it a passion, but it's something else to actually create the margin, create the time, have some of the discipline, pull in some of the resources to actually pull it off. I can't believe it's been a year. That blows me away.
Yeah, I know. Really, really has been a big thing for us. And when we talk about ideas, oftentimes we talk about it in the blue sky process. The idea of getting together and just throwing ideas up against the blue sky and seeing what we can go after, giving yourselves no limits. I was introduced to that a little bit at Disney when I had an opportunity to go be part of a blue sky process for a project I was working on. And then when I first met you with regard to the Poverty Encounter, the Attraction at Children's Hunger Fund, the walkthrough experience of what poverty is like in places around the world. You took me through the Blue Sky process. You took me and the people at Children's Hunger Fund through that. Like, hey, what are your best ideas? And some great ideas came out of that. But the fun of Blue Sky eventually has to be paired with the creativity and the limitations, but also the structure, the needed structure of architecture and show set design to bring it to life.
Well, for us, it's actually an interesting dance because we actually think part of the fun of Blue Sky, when you have the right people at the table, is bringing the folks that aren't necessarily trying to box in the big idea, but have that kind of expertise and, again, the brain damage that they've incurred over the decades. They know the rules of thumbs. They know the realities to have that fine balance of kind of shaping it in a way that absolutely accelerates whatever seed or kernel of creative big ideas are there, but also accelerates it by bringing it into reality sooner rather than later by shaping it, quickly into something that is doable. And again, architects can absolutely be part of that equation. They don't have to necessarily be limited, but it has to be the right architect because that is not. There's definitely some different personality types and different folks that probably should have really been engineers or stayed on the CAD draftsman floor. But again, the right folks with the right background and expertise can absolutely add to that creative energy of a Blue Sky. Yeah,
that's right. Well, that brings me to our guest today, Kevin Sherbrooke. He's an architect, show set designer. He's done a ton of projects in his career. And it's fun because he's, like a lot of folks we meet, he's a fan first and a bit of a pioneer, being one of the early adopters of computer modeling for architectural design way back when.
A lot of folks that aren't involved with the design documentation, disciplines or process. They hear the word CAD, computer assisted drafting. And it sounds so high tech. The reality is, Mr. Brady used to sit at his drafting table in the family den, with the pencil and the T-bar, and draw these 2-dimensional line drawings, and then all CAD did was it let people erase quicker and sped that process up of cutting and pasting, and but the reality is those drawings were still not very intelligent, and essentially over the last decade plus, most of the industry, including our firm, we've entered the matrix of the third dimension by entering into the space that's kind of called building information modeling, where we're basically virtually building these buildings in digital space. And again, I don't want to bore anyone with the details, but again,
that's
Kevin's
what we're here
also
for.
another early adopter. And, we get excited about not just being able to visualize space for presentations and eye candy, but again, to really be able to work that space out with all the different disciplines and coordinate. And it really helps avoid a lot of the errors and omissions and conflicts that plagued that older wave of 2-dimensional documentation.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Kevin as we go in. He worked for WDI for a while, working on Epcot Innovations. We're going to talk a little bit about his work at Tokyo Disney Sea with Storm Rider, Aquatopia. Universal, he's got a pretty cool story about Islands of Adventure, and got to work on things like the Hulk ride and the Spider-Man ride, which still kind of stands out as one of the ultimate great theme park rides out there. And of course, around the world doing stuff with Mirage Dubai, the Motion Gate parks in Bollywood, just all around.
Dude's been around the block.
Yeah, he's done some stuff. So let's get the party started and head up to the Blue Sky Loft at Storyland Studios for our interview with Kevin Sherbrooke. Well, here we are with Kevin Sherbrooke. This is great. So glad to have you. It's been a little while as we've tried to coordinate this, but we're really glad to have you.
Great. Hi, guys. And thanks for inviting me out here to Storyland Studios. It looks like a really great place to work, and I'm already running into people I know. So
I know. It's so
excited
cool
to be here.
We've loved having Kevin as kind of almost an extended member of our architecture team as we ramp up. But actually, I just realized this is our first show that has a specific topical focus on architecture, show set design. We've stayed in blue sky concept land for a long time, and I know that you've had plenty of experience in that. But I'm really excited to kind of share some of that brain damage and insight that you had with a few decades in the industry.
I'd love to start with just getting to know how you got into the industry. We were talking about it before,
right.
And it's just kind of everybody has a different story.
Yeah.
And so how did you kind of get roped in? And I definitely want to hear about the traffic between wherever you live and downtown LA.
Yeah. Well, it goes back early to childhood, and I mentioned that in the letter there. But I've been drawing since I've been 10 years old. My dad was an engineer, and he'd come home from work, and he'd have a pad, and he'd have all the mechanical pencils, and I would start drawing with him as he was doing his engineering calculations for work. That's where it kind of started, me drawing roller coasters and wacky designs for, never thinking I was going to be a theme park designer. But that kind of grew. I was 10 blocks from the pier in Santa Monica. That's where I grew up. So constantly going out to the pier with my mom and hanging out down there. I always had that vibe of a theme park. So early on in my subconscious, if you will, I had, an inkling to have fun and get out in the beautiful air and enjoy, a ride or two. So that grew. A few years later, I was probably about 12 when an uncle, Fortuna, he actually lived in the same building, would come down, and my parents would allow him to take me to various theme parks, like Beverly Center, or he took me to this is going back to like 1970s, took me down to the Long Beach Pier. And some of those memories were so vivid, like unbelievable, like it just in your subconscious, you dream about it. And I still never thought I could be an architect or a theme park designer. Went to school for psychology for a couple of years, UCLA, my alma mater, and eventually started to move more into design. I ended up doing architecture design at UCLA. Still thinking I'm just going to be Main Street architect. I started with residential, commercial, restaurants. And then I got the first call from WDI. And that call, I was actually working downtown Los Angeles. I was about 25 years old. Had never worked for a theme park company or know anybody in the industry. Kind of dreamed about it, but I got the call and my hair stood up like, Walt Disney's calling for me? Really? So I'm not sure how they got...
From the grave.
Yeah. It was a good company. I was working for R&L Interplan, but I was designing, basically bus stations and fighting the commute every day from Van Nuys to downtown. It was a gruel, and I was not, I still to this day, I'll go to downtown for meetings, but I don't want to be there, every day. That's a little pet peeve I have. I'll go horizontal in traffic, but not vertical. That's my rule. But no, it was the first call to do the Epcot Center Interventions Project.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a really...
Barry Braverman's claim to fame there.
That's right. Barry Braverman, Andy Sackler, some of the key people I met. And they put me up in a giant warehouse down on Chastain Street, and I was there for about a year by my lonely. I would go over to the main flower building to meet with show producers and art directors, but was doing a lot of production work for them on interventions. And Gary Williams was the lead architecture. I was working for the architecture group for starters. And I did a good job on that. And one funny story I mentioned, Mel, was there was one point where the construction was starting. I did the restaurant facades and things. And the whole team of show producers and art directors, we have to go to Orlando to see the project and everything. And I'm sitting there like, well, what about me? I want to go with you guys. And I kind of asked, but I didn't push it. I was still trying to be a nice guy, and ended up buying my own ticket, flying down there. I didn't meet with them, but it was my first experience at Disney World. And you think Disneyland is big. My dad took me to Disneyland, of course, as a kid, and that was another, I had the tickets and everything, and you could go on 1D ticket attraction or 1E. But going to Disney World was like, that was a big shocker to me. Like, oh my God, this is huge. This is a business like none other, and I would love to keep continuing it. And I came back, about a week later, and I was staying in like a Motel 6. I didn't have a lot of money and everything. But, taking the shuttle buses around and everything. But my bosses were so impressed that I would go that extra yard
Yeah, right.
to, make it a point to see where and what I was actually working on. I felt it important. And they said, okay, Kevin, we're going to get you onto some other projects. So, working at WDI, I had to sometimes go around to show producers to get the next gig because your gigs are over. Maybe one's 10 weeks. So as a theme park designer, you kind of have to work in that mentality of, hey, this may not be a lifetime job at this company A. I might have 10 weeks on this project, and you have to focus and you hit those deadlines. So, but that led to Animal Kingdom work and Restaurantosaurus and Dino Land and the ride. So that's kind of the first intro of how I got in.
Well, I'm fascinated with that Interventions kind of extreme makeover, and I think it's interesting because it almost parallels kind of the direction that you went, where you kind of inherited in that case these large, bulky architecture buildings. You weren't necessarily adding a bunch of square footage, but the idea of this design intervention, where the integration with environmental graphics, almost influenced by the '84 Olympics, that whole postmodern kind of kitsch, thing of hypergraphics and area development and landscape architecture and kinetics and shade sails. What did you learn about kind of the elements of the project that weren't just form follows function architecture? How do you layering all those?
Yeah, I mean, you hit a nail on the head, I would say, in that as working on these types of theme park projects, it's beyond architecture, I call it. It's like multidimensional. You have to take in and work closely with graphic people. A lot of the building was graphics, pure graphics. The signage going into the buildings was this sculptural kinetic formwork that integrated multi-layer graphics. And then you're right, the landscape. So traditional architects deal with your structural engineer, your electrical engineer, your mechanical engineer, maybe a landscape architect. But then you go to a WDI and you're dealing with 15 different groups. Everything from special effects people to show producers to art directors to colorists to, like you say, landscape people, to talking about botany and how am I going to irrigate my plants in front of your building? How's the shade going to hit it? So you try to work with all these people to come up with something that's very cohesive, and that can be challenging. It's multi-layers that you learn. Show lighting, for instance. I knew nothing about show lighting before. It was just general lighting. So all of these things, and then sound and creating, you learn on a dark ride, how to control sound in sound rooms and beats and sound attenuation through walls. There's a lot of acoustical factors that go into a show production. So I
know whenever we kind of hire a new architect, the first step in our kind of brainwashing process of ODing them on the pixie dust and kind of dropping them into this world of experiential storytelling is kind of almost de-architecting them and almost knocking them off the pedestal of the master supreme builder, capital A licensed architect, and just understanding the role in a team where, at Imagineering you had 140 disciplines, and even within Storyland we have that dozen disciplines or so in-house, and it's just so cool when you see how 1 + 1 = 3 when all the different disciplines kind of work together. But for you, Kevin, I mean, really the start and a transition from again I guess a facility commercial architect. Could you kind of help our listeners that don't necessarily know kind of the underhood, how those break down in terms of the disciplines you really have become an expert in terms of show set, design.
Well, I wouldn't say expert. Everyone calls themselves an expert. Everyone says they design the whole attraction.
But you said it right. You get to be a guru.
It's teamwork, and it's like taking off. I'm an AI licensed master's degree in architecture, but I take creed in everybody's opinion and listening. And the power hierarchy is often different. I mean, you've got show producers, you've got clients, IP people that are spending a lot of money, and they want it to look the way they want it to look. I'm not going to go and design a building to look like, what I would, a lot of times the facility architect in theme park, the buildings are sometimes very convoluted looking things to adapt a show into them. So that was one thing I did learn is, working in both show set and architecture, there's a big difference.
Can you mind explaining and defining that a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of times they call a facility design manager or a facilities architect or some of the big roles, titles you'd get in the business. And a lot of times it's really dealing with the shell and core of a large attraction box. It could be as simple as tilt-up construction or concrete walls, or you're dealing a lot with large span trusses for show spaces, and that could be different than a normal building. But when I first started, I thought, oh, the architect is going to do all the theme facades and he's going to do all the shows inside and everything. But no, that's a whole different team. So that's the show set team. And I've worked on both, and I like both. There's also what's called a theme facade, which, take for instance a project we're on Hotel Transylvania. That was heavily rock work on the theme, and it was meant to look like Hotel T in the animated feature. And we had to go in and create things like artificial perspectives and scale. So as buildings step up on a theme facade, sometimes you'll make things a little bit smaller. And Disney does this down Main Street. And you can do this to fool the viewer into thinking that buildings are much bigger than they are because your budget's only so big. And so you can do that with windows and dressings and windows. But a lot of those theatrics that go on the outside of the architectural shell are developed by a show set designer. The internal pieces, obviously, you'll put together show set packages, and those will start with the story. The story is so important. As you know, it's Storyland. If the story isn't solid and you're just creating, gizmos and things, you'll see those at some theme parks, then it won't be a great ride. You need beats. You need, scene 1 through scene 8. And you need to start off with something big and have a big finale at the end. I'm not a show writer, but I'm just going to tell you a hint of what I've seen. And those packages, are often involve show props. They can be static. They can be animated, if the arms are going up and down. They can be talking, or if you want to spend a fortune, you can do Pirates of the Caribbean and, have the pirates, fighting each other with amazing projection mapping and things that they're doing now. But and also, you're as a facility architect, you're having to deal with if it's a ride system in the building, you have to think about all those pits, where the speakers are going to go, coordinate all of the animatronics, all of these power locations, all of the HVAC ductwork around so you don't see them. Nobody wants to see an exit sign. We want to hide the exit sign. It's a little bit different. Whereas in a regular building, it'd be like, where's all the exit signs? But no, and controlling lighting and sound and all of these engineering factors, it's really critical. So I work with different groups that are top engineers in the field that do, control rooms with lots of computers that have to be cooled to a certain temperature. They control all the animatronics. It gets very tricky and complicated, but I love it. It's great. If that answers your question, that's great. As a start.
Yeah, you're creating spaces that are beyond what we think is the normal use. I mean, the guest sees what you want them to see. The technicians and all the equipment needs its own space.
Yeah, it's the art of illusion. Yeah.
Yeah, and you really yesterday I was at Disneyland, and one in our party had to go to the restroom before getting on Star Tours. Right. And there was a series of pathways that gets you from there to a restroom that I didn't know existed at Disneyland that took this young lady all the way through, and all of that. There's regress, and everything that your actions are helping to make possible. Isn't that true?
Yeah, good point. Operations, highly critical for any kind of attraction. I spend more time designing the queue lines for some of these big attractions than I do actually doing the theme spaces when I'm doing the architecture.
Well, people spend more time in those.
Yeah, and they're slowly realizing you should make the pre-show, the queue, whether it's a digital held device in your phone, more interactive, because you're going to be in that queue for an hour. I waited 3 hours to get on Pandora. I was there last year. It was incredible. But it was still a great experience because they thought through and gave you a lead up to the actual show. But like I say, nowadays they've got, Fast Pass, they've got VIP lines, they've got regular guests, they've got overflow guests, they've got peak day guest queue lines, and you have to plan all this out.
Single rider, all these bypasses.
Right. Right, and just the operational staff, how many people are going to have to hire, where they're going to be located, how are you going to flow people to the exit shop so that they purchase more merchandise, higher revenue generation. There's all of these things that go into design.
Before you get to design, all the programming, the space, we call it spatial scripting, but all the architectural programming, space programming, understanding those needs. And
30%, maybe 40% of the internal attraction that you never see as a guest can be for anything from HVAC rooms to control room racks to getting attendees to get around to different parts, getting people out of the building. Where do you work on the ride if it breaks down? You have to have a special off room, to get a crane in the building, to get it out of the building. All those kind of factors and considerations. Exiting. I mean, I have to do, when I'm doing facility design, critically, you got hundreds of people in a building. If there's a fire, you have to design your exiting so that they can get out of there and not disrupt the illusion of the ride, so that can be challenging as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I was at the 2010 Shanghai World Expo, and I was, it was the site of probably the largest gathering in human history. I think almost 70 million people attended over 6 months on a site that was, I think, 10 times the size of Epcot Center. But the one thing that I learned was that things like ingress, egress, industrial engineering, these are not about guest experience and convenience and issues. These are life and death.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw people getting crushed, people getting separated from their kids. I mean, grandmas. It was just horrific what can happen if that's not understood and done right by folks. And again, what's cool about you, Kevin, is someone that can get as passionate about the creative, blue sky elements and being true to, the original story and IP world of Hotel Transylvania, as well as kind of making sure it actually works, with the technical requirements.
Yeah, the show set packages, I didn't talk too much about them, but they're a little bit different than the architecture. You're typically you'll have a scene, say scene 1, and it'll have 10 to 15 props, and it'll have an animated prop. Maybe it'll have a big blimp or an airplane in the room, and you need to document that for a scenic house like Storyland to fabricate. And you need to work with the people on the floor. Like I've worked for Acme Made in America Studios, and it was just a summer job, but I learned so much about, it's not just a show set drawing, because sometimes you guys have to do a whole fabrication drawing after the show set drawing is done. But it's understanding the materials and what kind of special effects you can put in it, what your budget allocation, like I didn't know a static prop is $4,000, and to have an animated prop this big is, $20,000. Yeah. And so as a show producer, you have to be aware of these things to design a show that's worthy of the IP. But putting together the package typically of a show set, you've got 25 elements, say, and you're laying out your scene. So you've got a floor plan. Sometimes you'll have an elevated floor for the guests, so they're not looking down at the straight floor. It looks a little bit like you're more immersed in the scene. And then you're going to have backdrops. You can have scenic cyc walls, we call them, so it looks like a painterly sky or something like that. Yeah. We did that at DreamWorks. And special hidden lighting in there so that, so the show set designer is coordinating a lot of maybe it's a misting effect. You want to create a fog that you go through as the ride, or maybe it's a big wow moment. I love the idea of a wow moment, during the show. And something will happen. Maybe some show doors open and a Jurassic dinosaur head comes through it or something like this. And you need to document all that with your different departments at a place like WDI or Universal. And oftentimes that involves, describing the movement or showing the movement in multiple drawings to see how maybe the hand is waving or what's going on. And then there's a lot of keying in show set drawings, whether it's, we'll have a different symbol. So one could be for a show set piece. One could be for a speaker. One could be for a lighting effect, and so there's all these tags, something like 20 tags, and they'll have like FX1 will be special effects 1, and there'll be FX1 through 30. And it gets real technical, and you list out everything, and that goes back to a prop sheet that then they can calculate the cost of all of these elements and coordinate the purchasing, because oftentimes these overseas projects will require someone like you to categorize, build everything, box it up, ship it over there, send a couple of guys to install it and certify it, because we're the show people in Los Angeles and Pasadena. Yeah. Not everyone could do this, and that's why it's really special to live here.
Yeah, that's
if you want
true.
to do this.
That's true. I like to think that our audience is, for the Themed Attraction podcast, is 3 people, 3 different types of people. The first one is theme park fans. Where's my pass holders at?
I always thought there was just 2 people out there.
It really is.
There's a third person?
Yeah, there's a third person. Wow. It's not just you and me, Mel. Mel and I listen to the show. No,
I'd like to meet this third person.
Yeah. Well, okay. So perhaps there's one person out there with 3 qualities. They're theme park fans that love to talk about the theme parks. Then there's the industry folks who are quite aware. They go to IAAPA, they go to the TEA Summit. They're totally tied in and know, 'cause they're career folks.
Business development and all that, yeah.
And then there's the the college student or 20-something who's trying to find a career in this industry, but all they can think about is, well, there's really 2 or 3 places to go. You can go and try and get a job at Disney, try and get a job at Universal, try and get a job at Six Flags. Who knows what they can? That's all they can picture. But this industry is so broad. What with all the family fun centers,
that's it.
And then there's IPs and projects going in this world right now all over the place.
Everywhere.
And
Hundreds
I'm
of
just
theme parks all over the world.
I'm looking at your list, Warner Brothers Dubai, places all over the world that just continue to sort of open my mind even that this is not just limited to those ones that people are immediately thinking of. So it fascinates me that you have to go to these places, visit them, think about them, and bring that knowledge back to, like you said, Pasadena, Los Angeles, and create something that's going to be exported. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, there's different tiers of theme park design, and I hope to glean from this conversation that anybody that's young out there that loves theme parks and doodles around with drawings or roller coaster tycoon, like my son builds theme parks with me all the time for fun. There are avenues. And I initially started thinking, the door was closed at Disney, but it's project-based, and there's this whole other realm of companies out there. If you look hard enough, if you start going to some, meet and greet. I did a meet and greet the other day for BRPH here in Glendale, and it was great. All these kids came in with their resumes. They're college graduates. Some were from USC, some from UCLA, and they're really ambitious and looking for work. And if you start to meet and greet all these different people and network with great people like Mel, maybe he doesn't have a job for you today, but he'll know maybe like a Larry Wyatt or somebody else that, it's a small network of people. It seems like it, but it's weird. Like when you're not working for Universal Disney, you're in these smaller companies. I don't want to call them B companies because I've had great experiences with them. But you start to network with people, and I can pick up the phone and say, my project is done, and of anything else? And, maybe take a couple of weeks. But meet people, get your name out there, work on your LinkedIn, and start to look for some of these other smaller companies. This is theme park design, and there's probably 50 of them in LA that...
I'd love to get your unique perspective of having, again, worked at Disney, having worked directly at Universal.
Right.
And we'll go back to some of that fun stuff. But, comparing that to the small to medium-sized firms where you've been able to go kind of more blue sky to building, dream to dedication day. That's something that we particularly, enjoy is having some of the same team members that are involved with the blue sky to then be on site doing field art direction a few years later. And to have that continuity as opposed to completely handing it off and
well, I love that idea. I mean, one of the things I really want to be able to do with my career is not just to design, but to see it through and to see it fabricated and to see it constructed. So that the Motion Gate project I mentioned to you was that kind of broad experience, probably the broadest, bird's eye view, starting from blue sky, working with Terry Palmer, Brad Bybin, Seth Cover, all the guys at what was Riva, now Maiku. We all came together. It wasn't even a company. And we came together and I started there when there was 5 people. And within a year, we grew to like 80 to 100 people, 5 show producers. You saw the morphosis of it happen. And you knew that the funding was there. The client was there. It was very serious. And it wasn't like a Disney project that can go for a year. They're probably shorter time now. I think it's 6 months they've gotten it down to. But just on that side of it, it was much more rewarding to see things fabricated. And I follow Theme Park X, which is a construction website where I get to see everything that I designed 2 years ago getting built today, like in Universal Beijing. I'm seeing all these buildings still under India getting fabricated. So that is very rewarding to me. To see large construction pieces. Sometimes the shows don't come off the way you dream them to be, but what my first point would be is you've got to have a thick skin to be in the theme park business. Meaning, you might design 9 or 10 projects through schematic, none of them which gets built, because there's a lot of ambitious people out there in the world, trust me, and they will put up, whether it's $10,000 or $100,000 to design a schematic package, and then they realize, oh, this park is going to cost $685 million, which is actually cheap compared to some of the Disney things, but they can't do it, and the projects die, and I've seen so many of them die, and it's not because you're not a good designer, it's just because of funding. Yeah. So you see that on the B level. When you go into a Disney or Universal, most of the things that you design, are going to get built. It's very serious. You're working with top engineers day one, after schematic, and they tend to take longer. There's more, I'm not going to call it politics, but there's just more.
A lot of layers of internal.
A lot of layers of IP and corporate, approval. I remember, we would work sometimes for 6 months on, and big Peter Eisner's coming to view your project. And everyone's like shaking in their boots, whether it's going to get, thumb up or thumb down. It was almost like Spartacus. And most of them got through, but then some of them you'd come in on Monday.
Hybrid of Michael Eisner, Peter Rommel.
Yeah, it was right during that time, and there was a whole. They snuck us over to another building one time. We weren't supposed to be working on the campus, and it was all kinds of top secret things going on. But and sometimes you'll get what the term is shelved in the project. Whether it's funding or whether they're not ready for it in Anaheim or Florida. It'll get shelved. So there's a little bit of that, and also, like I said, what I noticed on those projects is sometimes you have to, when your project is over, go around and meet some of the other show producers that Marvel's coming or Star Wars is coming, and introduce yourself and say, look, this is what I did on this project at Interventions, or I've worked on a few of them. But it was a little bit more of that. But it was great. I mean, they've got obviously some of the top talent, Universal and Disney, that you can get. But when you're working for, I'll call them again, the B companies, it's the same people that are just not working there at the time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I worked at Universal. I've worked at Disney 2 times and Universal a couple of times. And I'll probably go back at some point for some things. But, it's the same people. I mean, there are the 30-year people.
It's a small cruise ship.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
How do you tell a story when people listen with more than their ears? Stories change lives. They make us remember, but only when they're felt and not just heard. Storyland Studios builds the impossible. We turn big ideas into reality. We tell stories in 3 dimensions to stir the senses so you can walk into places you've only seen in your dreams, in real life and real time. Storyland's artists, architects, and artisans take stories out of the imagination and build tangible dreams that leave lasting impressions and memories that endure for years. What's your story? Storyland Studios is themed entertainment, destination design, production, and fabrication. Connect with the team at Storyland Studios to get started building your impossible dream today. Visit StorylandStudios.com or call now. 800-218-1932. That's 800-218-1932. Storyland Studios, your big ideas' best ally.
You've worked on projects at vastly different, scales. When I think of a design intervention overlay like the Epcot Interventions Plaza versus even like it was interesting when California Adventure 1.0 was happening at the same time that Disney Seas, was happening for, multiple X factor of cost per square foot. Any insights that you've gleaned over the years in terms of designing towards a budget or on budget and kind of pulling off the intended effect? Again, from, a motion gate, Bollywood, to like some of these world-class IPs that...
for instance, something like Indiana Jones. I heard at the time it was $100 million and ended up 120. Mm-hmm. And something in Dubai, for like a Hotel Transylvania or Ghostbusters was more than like $25 million, so that's the budget. So I've learned over the years that buildings are expensive and construction costs are very expensive in different parts of the world. You can build twice as much stuff in China for half the cost because the labor's so cheap there in the theme park construction business. And one trick that I've learned, and Universal's doing this now as well on some of the Beijing projects, is the back of house, the big e-ticket attraction doesn't have to be, the Taj Mahal. It can be a Butler building, a pre-engineered building that costs $1.5 million, as opposed to if you built that from scratch and everything, it would be $5 million. So a lot of those facility costs can be saved. And then you can do things like LEED or energy saving, mechanics within the building to save, that's become real prevalent and code required nowadays when you get to that level. But put the money in the show. Don't put it in the box. And a lot of countries or companies or what you call them will waste a lot of money, and they'll realize, because they try to phase it, that they'll be digging year 1, the buildings will all be going up year 2, and then the shows will come in year 3 and they're out of money. They can't afford. And that's what you're paying to see.
What good's a beautiful theater if you don't have money to actually put on the show?
Yeah,
and
that's
actually,
right.
create a set and hire actors and put on a show. So
yeah, I really like that. Put the money in the show, not in the show.
There's a lot of exciting things happening with projection lighting too nowadays. Like for interiors of shows, you can do very simple, like the DreamWorks Theater I worked on up here at Universal Studios. You can do a lot of projection mapping to make very simple, plain drywall, white surfaces look like they're made out of gold and jewels and everything. And you can really fool the audience. That's just one little technique that you could do. But I work with cost estimators like Cumming, and they are hypercritical people to be friends with and to know in the industry, because they know where the projects are before anyone else does, because they're finding out if it's feasibility studies or whatnot. And then they're also, working side by side them. They can tell you a theme facade, whether it's a grade level 1 that costs $200 a square foot, or if it's a grade level 3 that costs $500 a square foot. And that can save you. Put the money where you want, and oftentimes it is looking through the props list and the estimation list to see where you can save money. But obviously a base building, you can build them different ways. It can be steel columns, concrete columns. You can save money with trusses, tilt up construction. There's a lot of different techniques that we look at all the time on these projects to try to keep the costs down, because they can get out of control quickly. And a lot of money goes into infrastructure. You wouldn't believe. I mean, on a big theme park, there's fiber optic, piping hubs that go underneath all of these attractions that all the POS stations talk to each other. There's giant, cooling stations that cool all the buildings. I mean, huge amounts of wiring and cabling that nobody really factors in when they're new to the business, that eats up 30-40% of your budget before you even get to the show. So thinking, like Terry told me that, why don't we move these buildings in just 10 feet? We'll save $100,000 just on the wiring and piping alone. I was like, really? So we made big moves like that. And that's from just pure experience. He knew that. So.
Yeah, Terry's quite a guru. He's we're going to have to get him in here
that'd be
sooner
super.
rather than later. We've had some great collaborations. On the you've worked with just about every major large scale, especially studio based project, from Universal Islands of Adventure to Universal Beijing to Walt Disney Studios Paris to Motion Gate. I was just curious on your take at a high level on kind of the compare contrast between Disney, Universal, some of these independent, like Motion Gate, where it's a kind of a hybrid of all these different IPs. Do you have any kind of thoughts from on high of having looking back at
I would just say be flexible. When you're oftentimes you're going to a job that you don't think is going to be very much. I mean, when I walked into to Riva for the Motion Gate project, it was just an empty warehouse with a couple of kids in there. And I said to the secretary, she was sitting at a folding table. We didn't even have a network. And it was just unbelievable. And, you go to a Universal or something, the whole thing is all network. The IT guys are helping you. You got your own server station. Everything's all the latest software. On a project like that, sometimes you have to put together your own kit of tools to go. And but be flexible, and don't think that if I can't get a Disney job or a Universal job, you can still get these other jobs to start and get your teeth into the industry and start to learn who people are. And then you will eventually, if you're good enough, you will make it to the bigger thing. But It's a little bit more intimidating, I think, just in general, going to Disney every day. You're up at, you're always there at 8 o'clock, and a little bit more flexible on the other ones. I could work, 10 to 4, work some at night. It's a little bit more personable on the smaller firms, whereas maybe you're not talking to a studio executive at Universal, although I did get to work with Mark Woodbury directly, so kudos to me on that.
Story. That was a great
it was funny. I worked on Islands of Adventure, and I was actually working at both WDI and Universal at the same time, and I had to sign NDAs for both. It was a night gig. I started on the Superhero Island with Jerry Parra. He's a good friend of mine, and Gene Nolman and Adrian Gordon and Dennis, and we started, with comic books. Get this, and you're trying to develop theme facades out of comic books. And Mark, he wasn't a big shot back then, but he came and he'd come down and just kind of check. He was still kind of the head of the whole department, but he would meet with the bigwigs. And then he started noticing I was doing 3D modeling in 3D Max and building all these, dailies for the superhero land, for Hulk and for Spider-Man attraction. I worked on with Phil Bloom. And he came out and he says, "Okay, Kev, why don't you come down to my office and let's talk about something?" And I go, "Oh God, okay." So I went down there, and it wasn't like today. I mean, he still emails me once in a while. I'm down in Florida. I haven't seen him recently, but he just won the big Thayer Award, right? The Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah,
Congratulations,
and
Mark.
It's something amazing. There's a humility and just like simple man, careful, thoughtful, and genuine that really comes through from that guy.
It didn't seem like the type of guy that would win something like that. But I've seen him since developing the genius of Harry Potter and seeing how they tied the parks together. I'm just like, this is like next level stuff. Yeah. This is incredible. So anyway, he calls me down to the office. He says, "Listen, we're doing this Islands Adventure Park." And they were working on the main, entry into there, the whole kind of piratey looking thing. Adrian was the art director on it. And they said, "Can you help us develop? We want a weenie, I'll call it a weenie, an icon for the entry to the park. The big Tower of Babel." And I said, "Sure." And he says, "We got this idea. It's the 7 wonders of the world, and this was one, and it fell in some Babylonian sea or someplace."
The lighthouse at Alexandria.
Alexandria, right? And he says, "We don't want it to look exactly like that. So can you do some variations in your 3D Max, thing?" And so I went home, and I spent about a week or two and just developing about 4 different designs and meeting with him regularly. So that was just one project that he had me do just directly with him and shown it to art directors as well. But he took that with a lot of pride. And I always just remember that as being a really fun project to work on with him. And then when they were getting ready to move down there and relocate to Florida, I ended up going down for about 6 months with Richard Krent and the retail team. But he asked me, he says, "Can you help us design the office building that we're going to, our first office building for implementation, the team, the operations group and the administration that's going to build right when, so yeah, sure, no problem." So I worked with him directly on that as well. That was great. And then I did get to go, so I was working, Scott Trowbridge, who, is the guru all of Star Wars now that just opened. I'm going next week, by the way. He was the show producer on the, and I didn't realize what a big guy he was at the time. I was working under Phil Bloom and, the ride guru, obviously you guys know him. You got to look him up, Phil Bloom. He does all the big e-ticket attractions out here in Pasadena. I went to talk to Scott a little bit, and he said, "Would you be interested in going down and being part of the A-team, starting construction on Islands of Adventure?" And I said, I'd never, I was born in Florida, but I hadn't been back in 20, 30 years. So I said, "Okay, let's do it." And I told my soon-to-be wife, Selena, we were dating. I said, "Do you want to go? All expense trip paid." So she came down with me, and I was in a little trailer, bulldozers going around me from morning till night. They were building the rivers, that go to connect the hotels and all the bridges and stuff. And it turned out great, and we would go to theme parks and ended up getting married soon after the trip and had our first son. And so that was a really good kind of theme park life experience that turned into a life-changing event,
And lo and behold, now graduating from UCLA, right? Kind of
actually today's graduation day. I mentioned that to you, and Richard was so much smarter than me going to get into UCLA. He had a 4.3 grade point average. We never thought he'd get in, and we had to take multiple SATs and everything. And he got in. And he got in all the colleges, but he's doing cognitive science and artificial intelligence, and he's doing programming and all kinds of stuff that I can't even figure out.
That's
It's beyond me.
fantastic.
So it's great to have your own son going to the same college that you did.
Well,
I got to relive
congratulations,
college.
Dad.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you, man.
This is a good day for you.
It
right?
is. Big
First,
day.
you get the themed attraction podcast, and then your son graduates from college. I mean, this is
it's about
it's amazing to be part of it.
Well, I don't need to ask the normal "Who's your favorite kid?" question that everybody always, but I will ask what's your favorite project that actually got built that you got to have a hand in?
Yeah, it's
designing?
funny. We were having beer over at EXP the other day, and all the guys were sitting around the table. It was just like a Friday night thing, and we said, what's your favorite attraction? And it's a great question to ask at a theme park event. And we went back and forth, and it ended up. I didn't work on it, but I think the Pirates of the Caribbean in Shanghai has got to be. And I've watched videos. I watch stuff on YouTube. There's Attractions 360, and there's the other one, the hyper resolution 4K one that I watch. I mean, it's almost like being there. I crank the speakers up, but the way they've done, the boat and enhanced it and built upon, the traditional Pirates of the Caribbean is just fantastic. But myself,
favorite attraction or favorite park, because you've worked on so many great parks.
Yeah, I mean, Spider-Man has got to be. I went to, and they just redid the film. That's got to be one of the still home run,
mind-blowing, paradigm shifting.
Great, I love it. It still holds up 20 years later. That was great. I never got to go on the Storm Rider attraction. They just turned it into Nemo. That was probably the heaviest.
I did. It was great.
Did you?
I'm sorry you missed it.
Yeah,
You worked on it, never got
a lot
to
of
go
times
on
you don't get to go on what you ride unless
Tokyo
you're diehard.
Disney Seas, Tomorrowland, right?
Yeah, you have to go to Disney Seas. I got to get over there. I did get to go to Abu Dhabi, and I haven't been to Motion Gate either. I want to get over there. I was 200 miles from Motion Gate, but there was an embargo in Abu Dhabi. It wouldn't let you in. So I just forget it. And but no, there's been so many great attractions. The Hulk was a great coaster attraction. I've worked on some big theater attractions.
I think of that tower is the weenie of the century. I mean, it's such a great welcome into the
park.
Into the park.
Islands,
But that coaster interaction, it was kind of on Hulk was a pretty major contribution of yours as well. Right?
Yeah. A lot of the pre-show and everything, they redid it. I just went this last year, and they've added a lot of new really good features. But like the pulsating rings and the operators that pretend, the big buildup for a coaster, I think is great. And then launching you through the tunnel, like you're really getting blasted. It was like the first launch coaster I think ever, and so that was great. What else? I mean, what other attractions are on that list? I can't think of many. I mean, on Motion Gate, there was the Ghostbusters attractions that, got to work on it from conception through, we handed it over to Gensler to do the engineering, but I got to work with the Gensler team that was doing the final architectural engineering and certifying the drawings to make sure, one of the things I mentioned is keeping design intent. What I mean by that is a lot of times you'll hand over a set of schematic drawings from very talented artists and illustrators, 3D modelers that we work with. And you'll see these things come back from architecture firms that look very blocky and bulky and out of proportion. And you have to be really cognizant of that and redline their drawings. And they don't want to see it because they're not going to get paid twice to fix it. But you have to. I'm very forthright in going to a show producer and saying, look, this is not what you guys designed. We should probably try to talk to the principal and get this thing right. And they'll usually do it, but sometimes it takes 4 and 5 tries to get it really tightened up. The door's right.
Yeah, it's always frustrating when they've spent hundreds of hours and they're losing information. And it's just like, stop helping.
Like you're going backwards. Exactly.
Well, this has been a ton of fun, and I'm so glad that we got to have you here today, all the way out here in Lake Elsinore. Thanks for coming. I know,
beautiful out here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got a big day today, and we're so grateful you shared some of it with us. Any last thoughts, ideas to just leave us with?
Well, you've seen some transitions in the industry from just technology. I mean, the old days of, probably you missed the old hand drafting over the drawing table phase, but from 2D CAD, AutoCAD to stepping into the third dimension of building information modeling and all the different 3D software and visualization tools. Has that been a challenge? Has it been good, bad, ugly, fun? As far as the new tools?
It's ironic because sometimes you go back and forth. And like last year or this last go, I was doing master planning all by hand. They said, Kevin, we know you can do it all in the computer and AutoCAD. We don't want to see that finished stuff. We want to see it hand-drawn. We want 5 options quickly. China client doesn't know what they want. They want to see lots of options, lots of color and splash. So I do love still going back to that. It's that hand-brain connection that sketching is just. I just bought a whole new drawing table and pencils and everything just to get back into it some more. But yeah, the one thing I did want to mention is, I was early into 3D modeling at college and everything, and it has evolved, and it's still evolving. And what's happening now at Universal and Disney, obviously it's going to BIM, Building Information Technology Management, and Revit, obviously, is a key program for anybody coming up and wanting to be working in the architecture department. ShowSet is still not doing it 100%. It's still mostly hand or digitally drawn with Photoshop and things like that. But it is becoming, I think the next generation, and a lot of that will be, subtly modeled and then incorporated into, because you have to factor that into the building. How are you going to mount and hold all of these showpieces? But I would definitely, I've struggled a bit with BIM. or with Revit early on, but I've gotten about 4 years experience now, so I feel pretty proficient. On the Beijing project, I worked on about 7 buildings, all in BIM, and there are challenges. It's new learning because you're working in a team environment where 5 different people. Joe's working on the doorknobs, Fred's working on the windows, and you're doing custom family components for this or that, or overseeing the structural and mechanical systems, which get emailed to you, and you combine, and Navisworks, and you see everything conflicting if there's pipes going through walls. Or it's the funniest thing. You'll bring the show producer in, and you'll see the Revit Naviswork model, and you'll see and they're like, "What's all the ductwork in the middle of my show? Get rid of it," and so you have to deal with that, and you see it. So it's very powerful in that respect. But there's still a long way to go with it. I think it's really good for cost estimating, and that's the way the future is, and where I'm focused right now anyway, is refining my skills, getting Revit certification professional so that you can get into those groups. And it's a different realm. It's like when you're a single architect, you're doing the whole package yourself, getting the permit and everything. But when you're in the Revit world, it's a much more, you're dealing with BIM managers, you're dealing with, changing technologies, updating models, and some of the models could be 400 or 500 megabytes large. Wow. So computer power is very important with these big projects. You can do all that.
Yeah, it's something we felt important enough to invest in about almost 20 years ago. I mean, it was definitely worth stepping into the matrix of that third dimension for sure.
Good.
Well, thanks, Kevin, for sharing these decades of experience and insights. And have fun at Star Wars Land and the Galaxy's Edge, by the way.
I'll try to get on. I hear it's tough.
A blast.
No, it's, you know what? This is the thing. You're gonna go into that and say, I can't believe how simple this works. They really did a good job making it easy for you to get through.
Oh, I'm a big Star Wars fan. I was lined up at Hollywood Boulevard back in the day, in 1975. So that was a big day too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm telling you, that's great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Freddy.
Hope to have you on again.
Thank you, Mel.
Well, do you get the sense that Kevin's been around the globe a few times, put some air miles on, and has the tire wear marks to show for it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's cool because he sees the big picture of a project, and which I think is what a great architect and show designer, having that understanding of both angles really helps somebody complete a project with avoiding a whole lot of the extra problems that could come up.
Yeah, and a fun thing about Kevin is he actually still draws by hand, and that's
right.
That's also
so
kind
cool.
of an increasingly rare special art form in this industry to again have someone that knows all the kind of operational rules of thumb, but has that kind of artist heart, as well as the technical skills.
Yeah, so we can't discount Mr. Brady. We can't.
That's right. Mr. Brady's awesome. Perm and all.
Yeah, that's right. Best outfit. Well, Mel, the sun is setting on our little excursion here. Let's spin this boat around and head for home. Until next time, thanks, Mel. The Themed Attraction podcast is hosted by Freddy Martin and Mel McGowan. Hey, I want to stop for a second right here and just thank you for listening to our show. And thank you to those who have come up to us in person and said, just given us great compliments. It means so much to us to know that this show is either helping you in your career or you're getting inspired by the stories and insights that our guests are able to share. So we can't thank you enough for that encouragement. Would you do us one more thing? Could you go on to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review for the show? It's a great way to get new people on board with the show so that we can continue doing what we love to do, and that's sharing the show with you. We want to thank our guest, Kevin Sherbrooke. Get in touch with him via his LinkedIn profile. Get access to more stories and interviews at themedattraction.com, an insider's look at theme park design by theme park designers. Follow the action on Instagram and Twitter at themedattraction.com. Connect with Mel by email via mel@storylandstudios.com or follow him on Twitter at Mel McGowan and Instagram at Visioneer. You can find me at freddymartin.net and follow my adventures at Skipper Freddy on Instagram and Twitter. Our theme music was composed by Rob Watson, other music provided by The Lost Dogs. This episode was designed and produced by the one and only Dr. Barry Hill. Find him at barryrhill.com. You know, Mel, Barry's thirst for adventure is unmatched. He recently went to school to get his bush pilot's license. I won't fly with him, though. It was a crash course. Thanks for listening, folks.